Initially, Trump had one position, and so did Witkoff. And then they flipped and said no enrichment. And then they continued the negotiations. And the night before the attack, Trump said that we don't want war. And then after the attack, he said, we're all for it. And you're saying Iran? Is Iran going to come back to the negotiating table? The audacity. Come on. Show at least a bit of integrity.
All right. Well, the media has been covering itself in glory, as you would expect, in the way they've been covering this. U.S. and U.K. media coddles a rogue state. The headlines normalize Israel's egregious strike, not even mention of their lack of legal justification or strikes in residential areas. Media frames development as if it were normal. This is not just trash, it's criminal. And here you see somebody's news feed here. Israel bracing for retaliation after striking Iran. Israel said it struck dozens of targets across Iran, aiming to cripple Tehran's nuclear program. Israel says its strikes targeted nuclear sites in Iran, as U.S. says it is not involved. Israel attacked Iran, Israel's defense minister said, raising fear of an all-out war between the two powerful militaries. Now, needless to say, if this had been the other way around, these headlines would not be so cautious, so measured, and so tacitly approving of the Israeli action. They're taking a rational action and bracing for the consequences. Here we have the BBC, CBS, and NBC maximize attacks on Israel, but minimize attacks on Iran in the same headline. Here's the BBC. Iran launches new wave of missiles at Israel as Israeli Air Force strikes targets in Tehran. That's how they do it. Iran launches missiles at Israel, and some hit Tel Aviv as Israel attacks Iranian nuclear sites and commanders.
They blew up apartment buildings. They killed children.
Yeah.
They killed civilians. What the hell are you talking about?
Right. And the Iranian attacks are the only ones of real consequence, right? And there's no strategic purpose to the Iranian attacks. NBC, Iran fires missiles at Israel in escalating conflict over nuclear site attacks. Piers Morgan covering himself in glory like he does. I've been increasingly critical of Israel's war strategy in Gaza. It only took me 19, 20 months to notice that it was a genocide after talking to basically every legitimate expert on earth about it and having them lay it out for me in very clear terms. It only took me about 20 months to get there. But given the IAEA report exposing Iran's imminent nuclear threat and the Iran regime's stated intent to wipe out Israel, plus support for Hamas, Houthi, Hezbollah terrorism, Israel's preemptive strike seems justified. And that's why
it's just amazing. It's fucking amazing. Maybe I have PTSD. We were in talks with them. Our government, not Israel, our government, quote unquote, our government, was in diplomatic talks with them. Israel, because they never wanted those talks to begin in the first place, decides, you know what? We're going. They say they had the green light. I tend to believe that. If we didn't explicitly give them the green light, we tacitly gave them the green light. And now here we are. It's just unbelievable that you could say that this is not anything but a completely unprovoked act of aggression. We were negotiating with them. We've had how many rounds of talk so far? And they go and do this. It's incredible what these fucking people are able to conjure up as justification for a blatant act of illegal aggression.
Yeah, and if you're going to be screaming at people 1 week about how they're committing a genocide, the idea that you're going to see them as a legitimate state capable of moral and legally justifiable actions the next, how does that work?
Right, exactly.
If it's a state committing a genocide, how can you support military actions that it's taking on another front? Doesn't that automatically make the state illegitimate?
Right.
A state committing a genocide. Well, you know what? I don't really like what the Nazis are doing in England, but you can't blame them for the Russian front.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
basically what you're saying.
Yep.
Aside from that, just to remind everybody, the United States intelligence institutions already concluded in March of this year that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Don't let this stop your propaganda, though. This was somebody responding to Piers Morgan. Tulsi Gabbard signed off on this. This has got to be a very confusing time for all the Cruella DeVille simps who have a real thing for her, it seems. So this woman here is a reporter for Sky News. I did not get her name. She doesn't know it yet, but in 2 minutes, she will become the most hated person across the global South. So she was having an interview here with Mohammad Marandi, who's an Iranian professor, expert on the history of the region, and he calls her out very directly on the hypocrisy of herself and Western media generally.
But how do you know
So are
that
you denying that the top commanders have been killed? Are you denying that top commanders were killed?
Oh, so you mean what you're referring to basically is an attack, an act of aggression, that they suddenly fire missiles at civilian targets at apartment buildings and slaughter people in those apartment buildings, slaughtering whole families. For you, that's targeting. That's a really sophisticated act.
But if I can just ask, have military facilities been hit? Have nuclear facilities been hit?
One of the buildings that had some of these commanders, one or two of these commanders, was a large apartment building where they killed everyone, 60 people, 20 children. That's not important for people like you, but that's important for people like us. For you, people like you who support ethno-supremacism and the chosen people being able to slaughter and exterminate
Professor Marandi, I'm just trying to get the perspective. We're trying to give you airtime so that you can give us the Iranian perspective.
So then shut your mouth and let him talk. Shut your mouth. He's giving you his perspective.
Yeah, that's a favorite tactic of theirs. They will tacitly attack, badger, question, and slant their questions to discredit the people they're interviewing. And then when they respond and call it out, well, but we're giving you airtime to express your point of view. So clearly we're not biased. If we were biased, you wouldn't be on. Never drawing attention away from the obvious. They have them on in order to try to discredit them with these kinds of slanted questions.
Right, and airtime
right from the beginning. Are you denying she sounds like she's working for the Israelis?
Of course. Of course.
And we want to know,
This is how you twist the truth. You shouldn't invite me because you're easily exposed. Iran was negotiating. Initially, Trump had one position, and so did Witkoff. And then they flipped and said no enrichment. And then they continued the negotiations. And the night before the attack, Trump said that we don't want war. And then after the attack, he said, we're all for it. And you're saying Iran? Is Iran going to come back to the negotiating table? The audacity. Come on. Show at least a bit of integrity. A bit of integrity will help.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay,
they were
Professor
at the
Marandi,
negotiating table.
On the program.
Yeah. Take a walk. Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible.
Exactly.
They were at the negotiating table.
Right. That is what is expected of people in her position if you want to get that job and keep that job. This is what Taibbi has written about so extensively, the way it works in these newsrooms, because when you point this out, establishment cheerleaders will say, what do you think, it's a conspiracy? What do you think, they all agree on how they're going to report the news? And Taibbi says, no, it doesn't work that way. People have eyes. They see who gets promoted. They see who gets laid off, and they don't have to tell you how you need to cover things. It's very clear how you need to cover things. So really only the worst people get to that level, and only the worst people last at that level. If you're not the kind of person who's going to present this story from the Israeli point of view with that kind of very unfair, disingenuous framing, you're not going to be the person asking those questions for very long.
How could you ask him are you guys willing to come back to the table? They were at the table.
That's her job.
They were at the table. This is what I mean, folks.
They're not reporters. They're spokesmodels.
Yeah. And this is how they brainwash people. This is how they manufacture consent for these ridiculous wars, which have no business being fought. Our country, our government in the United States, Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, we were in talks with them. Israel takes it upon themselves, technically, to bomb them. And then you ask him, are you guys going to come back to the table? Why don't you ask Israel, are you going to allow these talks to go on? Of course, they won't ask Israel that because Israel never wanted these talks in the first place. Israel has wanted to do this since before 9/11. And just after 9/11, I showed you in the last segment, Netanyahu's coming out. We got to attack Iraq and Iran. Iraq and Iran. They actually thought Iraq was going to be easy. They actually thought they were going to be able to knock 7 countries out in 5 years. Because it wasn't easy, things got more complicated. The timeline became more dragged out. They had to develop alternative strategies. This is that alternative strategy in motion. Israel never wanted these talks. They never wanted these talks. And so the question should be posed to them. Are you going to let these diplomatic negotiations continue because you were the one who interrupted them so violently and so outrageously and so recklessly, as to perhaps draw the entire world into an apocalyptic nuclear conflict? That's what the question should be. Not to one of the two negotiating partners, are you willing to come back to the table? It's just extraordinary, but these are the lies they are willing to tell, and they work on people. Now, hopefully, as we said in the last segment, hopefully the memory of the Iraq War is still fresh enough in enough people's mind where it doesn't work on enough of them. That remains to be seen. But boy, are they going to try. They're going to try with everything they got. And you are going to be extremely frustrated watching the TV over the next couple of months, hopefully not the next few years, but certainly in the near future, you're going to see a lot of just maddening bullshit from all corners of the media trying to make this make sense.
I think they're going to have a very hard time with this because if this had happened under Biden or President Harris, okay, well, then the liberals will go along with anything if a Democrat is in charge of it, literally anything. But it's not. It's Trump. And they just cannot back Trump's play on this. They just can't. And MAGA is not as mindless as the libs. So they're not really biting. I am not seeing the rank and file. I'm seeing more rank and file MAGA say shit we've been had than I'm seeing say, let's go fuck up Iran. I'm not seeing a lot of that. So who are they going to persuade? But this is a good example of why a lot of people say, myself amongst them, you can't get anywhere really until you destroy this media complex and the faith in it. Because you do have so many people who, it really is brainwashing. That framing, will you come back to the negotiating table, and people who believe that this is news, that this is grape juice and not grape drink, that it's not a fake, vague memory of the real thing. Right. People who believe this, they hear that, man, and they just take that programming without even thinking about it. Yes, and many of these people, because it's mostly libs who still buy into the corporate media. Sky News has a more conservative audience, but overall, it's libs who take in these kinds of narratives. You have Israel has been pretty well proven to have put Trump in office. So you care so much about that. Why do you want to side with Israel? But they will never make that leap, because you make that leap, you've got to question everything you believe.
Right. Exactly.
And that is a very scary thing. Like, once you acknowledge that Russiagate was not true and it was a deflection from Israel, if you can accept that, which they won't, that's it. You're red-pilled at that point. Once you see that the media would be that dishonest, that they would wage a 4-year campaign of distraction from the reality that anyone who actually knew anything in the media certainly knew of Israel's influence, Once you see that, that's it. And that, for a lot of these people, that has consequences, man. If you're in the professional managerial class, you can't go around and start talking that kind of shit. You'll get fired, man. You'll get kicked out. It's like in Cool Hand Luke, where he goes, "Oh, I knew the whole time you were faking it," and he goes, "Nah, they broke me. You can't fool them about a thing like that." That's it, man. Once you've been red pilled, they're gonna sense it.
Right.
You're not gonna indefinitely be able to fake being a lib in good standing anymore. And that is a big part of why, if you've ever argued with them, they're so resistant. They're such a wall, because you're telling them to almost become a different person. And that's scary for anybody.
Please clap.